The rain poured relentlessly as Officer Marcus Carter sat in his patrol car, the rhythmic tapping of droplets on the windshield mirroring the tension in his chest. The radio crackled to life, dispatching him to a domestic disturbance in the heart of the city's most volatile neighborhood. Marcus, a seasoned officer with a reputation for fairness, tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He knew this call could go sideways in seconds. As he arrived, the scene was chaotic. A man shouting, a woman crying, and a crowd gathering. Marcus stepped out, his badge glinting under the streetlight, and approached with caution. He knew this wasn't just about breaking up a fight. It was about diffusing a bomb of pent-up anger and mistrust. The man, a towering figure with a scarred face, turned to Marcus, his eyes blazing. "You think you can just show up and fix everything?" he spat. Marcus raised his hands, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to listen." The crowd murmured, their skepticism palpable. Marcus knew this was more than just a job. It was a test of humanity. He knelt beside the woman, helping her to her feet, and spoke softly to the man, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. For a moment, the rain seemed to pause and the world held its breath. By the time backup arrived, the situation had de-escalated. Marcus handed the man his card, urging him to call if he needed help. As he drove away, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The city was a powder keg, and every call was a spark waiting to ignite. But Marcus believed in the power of empathy, even in the face of hatred. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was determined to prove that humanity could prevail, even in the darkest corners. As the rain continued to fall, Marcus reflected on the lessons he'd learned over the years. Policing wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about understanding the people behind the crimes. It was about seeing the humanity in everyone, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. And as he drove into the night, Marcus vowed to keep fighting for that humanity, no matter the cost. The precinct buzzed with activity as Marcus walked in, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor. He was greeted by the sight of a fresh-faced rookie, Officer Jake Thompson, nervously adjusting his uniform. Jake had just graduated from the academy, his idealism still intact. Marcus was assigned to mentor him, a task he approached with cautious optimism. "First rule of the job," Marcus said, clapping Jake on the shoulder, "expect the unexpected." Their first call together was a traffic stop that quickly escalated. The driver, a young black man, became agitated when Jake asked for his license. Marcus stepped in, his calm demeanor diffusing the situation. Later, Jake questioned Marcus's approach. "Why didn't you just arrest him? He was resisting." Marcus sighed, knowing Jake had a lot to learn. Resisting doesn't always mean guilt, sometimes it means scared. Our job is to protect, not provoke. As the day wore on, Jake began to see the complexities of policing. He witnessed Marcus de-escalate a tense standoff with a homeless veteran and comfort a child caught in the crossfire of a gang dispute. By the end of their shift, Jake's perspective had shifted. He realized that being a cop wasn't just about authority, it was about compassion. That night, as they sat in the patrol car, Jake turned to Marcus. "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm?" Marcus smiled faintly. "You learn to see the person behind the problem, and you never forget that they're human. Just like you." Jake nodded, the weight of the badge feeling a little heavier and a little more meaningful. The city was on edge. A video had gone viral, a white officer shooting an unarmed black teenager during a routine stop. Protests erupted, and the precinct was inundated with calls. Marcus watched the footage, his heart heavy. He knew the officer involved. They'd trained together. But this wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about a system that had failed too many times. Marcus and Jake were assigned to patrol the protests. The air was thick with anger and grief, the chants of "no justice, no peace" echoing through the streets. Marcus tried to keep the peace, but tensions were high. When a bottle was thrown, the line of officers reacted with force. Marcus shouted for calm, but it was too late. The crowd surged, and chaos ensued. In the midst of the turmoil, Marcus spotted a young girl, no older than 10, separated from her parents. He fought through the crowd, shielding her from the chaos. Jake followed, his eyes wide with fear. Together, they got the girl to safety, her tears staining Marcus's uniform. It was a small act of humanity in a sea of anger. but it reminded Marcus why he wore the badge. As the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the system was broken. But he also knew that change started with individuals, people willing to stand up and do the right thing, even when it was hard. And as he looked at Jake, he saw a glimmer of hope. The next generation of officers could be different if they were taught to see the humanity in everyone. The morning after the protests, the precinct was a war zone of emotions. Officers sat in silence, their faces etched with exhaustion and guilt. Marcus scanned the room, his eyes landing on Jake, who looked shell-shocked. The weight of the previous night's events hung heavy in the air. Marcus knew this was a pivotal moment for Jake, for the department, and for the city. He approached Jake, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Jake shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't sign up for this." Marcus nodded. "None of us did, but this is where we prove what we're made of." The chief called a meeting, his tone somber. He addressed the viral video, condemning the officer's actions, but also defending the department's integrity. Marcus felt a surge of frustration. Defending the system wasn't enough. It needed to change. He stood up, his voice cutting through the room. "We can't keep pretending this is an isolated incident. If we don't address the root of the problem, we're part of it." The room fell silent, some officers nodding in agreement, others glaring in defiance. Later, Marcus and Jake were assigned to community outreach, a new initiative to rebuild trust. They visited schools, churches, and community centers, listening to the concerns of the people they served. It was grueling work, but Marcus believed it was essential. He saw the skepticism in people's eyes, but also the glimmer of hope when they realized not all cops were the enemy. As they left a community meeting, Jake turned to Marcus. "Do you think we can really make a difference?" Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not about fixing everything overnight. It's about showing up day after day and proving we care. That's how change happens." Jake nodded, a newfound determination in his eyes. The call came in the middle of the night. A tip about a drug ring operating in the city's south side. Marcus and Jake were assigned to follow up, their informant a young man named Tyrell, who had grown up in the neighborhood. Tyrell was hesitant, his distrust of the police evident. But Marcus knew how to talk to people like Tyrell. He'd been in their shoes once. They met in a dimly lit alley, the air thick with tension. Tyrell's eyes darted around as he spoke, his voice low. "I'm only doing this because my little brother got caught up in this mess. I don't trust y'all, but I don't have a choice." Marcus nodded, his tone respectful. "We're not here to judge you, we're here to help." The operation was risky, but Marcus and Jake managed to dismantle the drug ring, arresting the leaders and rescuing several kids caught in the crossfire. Tyrell watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. As they wrapped up, Marcus approached him. "You did the right thing," he said. Tyrell scoffed. "Yeah, but will it matter? Y'all just gonna lock them up and someone else will take their place." Marcus sighed, knowing Tyrell had a point. As they drove back to the precinct, Jake was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "He's right, isn't he? We're just putting a band-aid on a bullet wound." Marcus nodded. "Maybe, but if we save even one kid from that life, it's worth it." Change starts small, Jake. We just gotta keep pushing. The department was rocked by scandal when an internal investigation revealed that several officers were involved in a corruption ring. Marcus was devastated. One of the officers was his former partner, someone he'd trusted implicitly. The betrayal cut deep, and Marcus found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the job. Jake was furious, his idealism shattered. How are we supposed to do our jobs when even our own people are crooked? Marcus didn't have an answer. He knew the system was flawed, but this was a new low. The public's trust in the police was at an all-time low, and Marcus felt the weight of that distrust every time he put on his uniform. The investigation dragged on, each revelation more damning than the last. Marcus was called to testify, his testimony a mix of anger and sorrow. He spoke about the importance of integrity, about the need for accountability. But he also knew that words weren't enough. The department needed a complete overhaul, and Marcus wasn't sure if he had the strength to fight for it. As he left the courthouse, Marcus was approached by a reporter. "Officer Carter, do you still believe in the police force?" Marcus paused, his eyes scanning the crowd of protesters outside. I believe in the people who wear the badge for the right reasons, and I believe in the communities we serve. But we've got a long way to go. The fallout from the corruption scandal was swift and brutal. Officers were fired, arrested, or resigned in disgrace. The department was in shambles, and morale was at an all-time low. Marcus found himself thrust into a leadership role, tasked with rebuilding trust both within the department and in the community. It was an uphill battle. The protests had intensified, and the city was on the brink of chaos. Marcus knew that words alone wouldn't suffice. Actions were needed. He implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation and implicit bias, and he pushed for greater transparency in police operations. But change was slow, and the resistance from within the department was fierce. Jake struggled with the new reality, his faith in the system shaken. "How do we know who to trust?" he asked Marcus one night. Marcus sighed. "We don't, but we have to lead by example. If we show that we're willing to change, maybe others will follow." Despite the challenges, Marcus began to see small signs of progress. Community leaders started to engage with the department, and officers began to embrace the new initiatives. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Marcus knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to see it through. A high-profile case put the department back in the spotlight: a missing child from a wealthy family. The pressure was immense, and the media scrutiny was relentless. Marcus and Jake were assigned to lead the investigation, their every move watched and criticized. The case took them deep into the city's underbelly, where they encountered a web of corruption and deceit. But Marcus refused to give up, his determination fueled by the memory of the young girl he'd saved during the protests. He knew that every child deserved a chance, no matter their background. After days of relentless searching, they found the child in an abandoned warehouse, scared but unharmed. The media hailed them as heroes, but Marcus knew the real victory was in the small moments. The tears of relief from the child's parents, the gratitude in their eyes. As they left the scene, Jake turned to Marcus. "This is why we do it, isn't it? For moments like this." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, but we can't forget the ones we didn't save. They're the reason we keep fighting." Marcus reached out to community leaders, proposing a partnership to address the root causes of crime. It was a bold move, and not everyone was on board. But Marcus believed that real change could only happen if the police and the community worked together. The first meeting was tense, the air thick with mistrust. But Marcus spoke from the heart, his words resonating with many in the room. "We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. If we want to make a difference, we have to do it together." Slowly but surely, the alliance began to take shape. Programs were launched to provide job training, mentorship, and resources to at-risk youth. Marcus and Jake became familiar faces in the community, their presence a symbol of hope and progress. It wasn't perfect, and there were setbacks along the way. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The alliance faced its first major test when a young man was shot by an officer during a routine stop. The incident sparked outrage, and the fragile trust between the police and the community was on the verge of collapse. Marcus knew that how they handled this would define the future of the alliance. He pushed for a transparent investigation, even as others in the department resisted. "If we don't hold ourselves accountable, we're no better than the corrupt cops we've condemned," he argued. The investigation revealed that the shooting was unjustified, and the officer was charged. It was a painful but necessary step toward accountability. Marcus addressed the community, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We failed you, and for that I'm sorry. But we're committed to doing better. This is just the beginning." The community's response was mixed, but many saw the department's actions as a sign of progress. Marcus knew it wasn't enough, but it was a step in the right direction. Marcus took Jake under his wing, teaching him not just the skills of policing, but the values that came with it. They spent hours discussing the complexities of the job, the importance of empathy, and the need for integrity. Jake struggled with the weight of it all, but Marcus was patient. He knew that shaping the next generation of officers was one of the most important things he could do. "It's not about being perfect," Marcus told him. It's about being willing to learn and grow. Their bond grew stronger, and Jake began to see the job in a new light. He realized that being a cop wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about serving the community and making a difference. As they patrolled the streets together, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He knew that Jake would face challenges, but he also knew that he was ready. A natural disaster struck the city, flooding the streets and displacing thousands. The department was stretched thin, and Marcus and Jake worked tirelessly to help those in need. The crisis brought out the best and worst in people. Looters took advantage of the chaos, but there were also countless acts of heroism and kindness. Marcus and Jake worked alongside community members, their shared humanity transcending the usual divides. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus found a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the job wasn't just about fighting crime. It was about being there for people when they needed it most. As the waters receded and the city began to rebuild, Marcus knew that the bonds formed during the crisis would last a lifetime. Marcus's past came back to haunt him when a man he'd arrested years ago was released from prison. The man, now radicalized, targeted Marcus, blaming him for the injustices he'd faced. The confrontation was intense, the man's anger palpable. But Marcus refused to meet hatred with hatred. He spoke calmly, acknowledging the man's pain, but also standing firm in his belief that violence wasn't the answer. The situation was diffused, but it left Marcus shaken. He realized that the scars of the past ran deep, and that healing would take time. As he drove home that night, Marcus reflected on the lessons he'd learned. He knew that the road to justice was long and difficult, but he was committed to walking it, one step at a time. The Alliance's efforts began to bear fruit as crime rates dropped and community engagement increased. Marcus felt a sense of pride, but he also knew that there was still much work to be done. A new initiative focused on mental health and addiction was launched, providing resources and support to those in need. Marcus saw firsthand the impact it had, as people who had once been written off were given a second chance. The progress was slow, but it was real. Marcus knew that change didn't happen overnight, but he was willing to fight for it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of hope. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus's efforts were recognized, and he was promoted to a leadership role within the department. It was a bittersweet moment, as he knew that his new position would mean less time on the streets. But Marcus also knew that his work was far from over. He was determined to use his new role to push for even greater change, to create a department that truly served and protected all members of the community. As he handed over his patrol duties to Jake, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He knew that Jake was ready and that the next generation of officers would carry on the work he had started. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus took a moment to reflect on his journey, the highs and lows of his career flashing before his eyes. He thought about the lives he'd touched, the battles he'd fought, and the lessons he'd learned. He realized that the job wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than he found it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A new challenge emerged as a wave of cybercrime swept the city. Marcus and Jake were thrust into a world they barely understood, their skills put to the test. But Marcus refused to back down. He sought out experts, learned new skills, and pushed the department to adapt to the changing landscape. The fight was difficult, but Marcus knew that it was necessary. He realized that the job was constantly evolving and that they had to evolve with it. As they made their first arrest in the cybercrime unit, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A fellow officer was killed in the line of duty, a stark reminder of the risks they faced every day. Marcus was devastated, his grief mingling with a sense of guilt. But he also knew that the best way to honor his fallen comrade was to keep fighting, to keep pushing for change. The funeral was a somber affair. the department coming together to mourn their loss. Marcus spoke, his words a tribute to the sacrifices made by those who wore the badge. As he left the cemetery, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A young boy approached Marcus during a community event, his eyes wide with admiration. "I want to be a cop like you when I grow up," he said. Marcus knelt down, his voice gentle. "Being a cop isn't just about wearing the badge, it's about helping people, about making a difference. You think you can do that?" The boy nodded, his determination clear. As Marcus watched the boy run off, he felt a sense of hope. He knew that the next generation held the key to real change and that they were ready to rise to the challenge. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus stood at the edge of the city, the skyline stretching out before him. He thought about the journey he'd been on, the battles he'd fought, and the lessons he'd learned. He realized that the job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than he found it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Jake took on a leadership role within the department, his growth a testament to Marcus's mentorship. Marcus watched with pride as Jake implemented new initiatives and pushed for greater accountability. The department was changing, and Marcus knew that Jake was leading the charge. He felt a sense of pride, knowing that the work he had started would continue long after he was gone. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus took a moment to reflect on his journey, the highs and lows of his career flashing before his eyes. He thought about the lives he'd touched, the battles he'd fought, and the lessons he'd learned. He realized that the job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than he found it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A new challenge emerged as a wave of cybercrime swept the city. Marcus and Jake were thrust into a world they barely understood, their skills put to the test. But Marcus refused to back down. He sought out experts, learned new skills, and pushed the department to adapt to the changing landscape. The fight was difficult, but Marcus knew that it was necessary. He realized that the job was constantly evolving and that they had to evolve with it. As they made their first arrest in the cybercrime unit, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The loss of Officer Ramirez hit the department hard. She was young, passionate, and had a bright future ahead of her. Marcus stood at her memorial, his heart heavy with grief. Her death was a stark reminder of the dangers they faced every day. But it also reignited Marcus's determination to fight for change. He knew Ramirez wouldn't want her death to be in vain. At the funeral, Marcus gave a eulogy that resonated deeply with everyone present. Ramirez didn't just wear the badge, she lived by it. She believed in justice, in fairness, and in the power of compassion. If we want to honor her memory, we have to carry that belief forward. The crowd was silent, but the resolve in their eyes spoke volumes. In the days that followed, Marcus pushed for stricter safety protocols and better training for officers. He also advocated for mental health support for the department, knowing that the emotional toll of the job was often overlooked. Jake supported him every step of the way, his own grief fueling his determination to make a difference. As Marcus stood at Ramirez's grave one last time, he whispered a promise. "We'll keep fighting, Ramirez. For you, for the community, and for the future." He walked away with a heavy heart, but a renewed sense of purpose. Years passed, and Marcus's influence continued to shape the department. The initiatives he had fought for became standard practice, and the alliance with the community grew stronger. Crime rates dropped, and trust between the police and the people they served reached an all-time high. Marcus knew there was still work to be done, but he was proud of how far they had come. Jake had risen through the ranks, becoming a captain and a leader in his own right. He often sought Marcus's advice, their bond as strong as ever. Marcus watched with pride as Jake mentored new officers, passing on the lessons he had learned. "It's not just about the badge," Jake would say. "It's about the people behind it and the communities we serve." Marcus eventually retired, but his legacy lived on. The department had transformed, and the city was a safer, more united place. As he looked out over the skyline one last time, Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had dedicated his life to making a difference, and he had succeeded. As he walked away, Marcus knew that the fight for justice and humanity would continue. But he also knew that the foundation he had built would endure, inspiring future generations to carry the torch. The road ahead would always be difficult, but Marcus had proven that change was possible, one step at a time. The precinct buzzed with activity as a new recruit, Officer Mia Torres, arrived. Fresh out of the academy, Mia was eager to prove herself. Marcus, now a consultant for the department, was asked to mentor her. He saw a spark in her eyes that reminded him of Jake years ago. "First rule," Marcus told her, "this job isn't about power, it's about service." Mia's first day was a baptism by fire. A call came in about a robbery in progress, and Marcus took her along. The scene was chaotic, but Marcus guided her through it, showing her how to stay calm under pressure. Mia handled herself well, her instincts sharp and her heart in the right place. After the call, Marcus debriefed her. "You did good today, but remember, every call is a chance to make a difference. It's not just about catching the bad guys, it's about helping the good ones." Mia nodded, her respect for Marcus growing. As they left the precinct that night, Marcus felt a sense of déjà vu. He knew Mia had the potential to be a great officer, and he was determined to help her get there. Mia's presence brought a fresh perspective to the department. She was passionate about community outreach and quickly became involved in the Alliance's programs. Marcus watched with pride as she organized events and built relationships with the people they served. One day, Mia approached Marcus with an idea. "What if we create a youth mentorship program? Get kids off the streets and into positive environments." Marcus loved the idea and helped her pitch it to the chief. The program was approved, and Mia took the lead. The impact was immediate. Kids who had once been skeptical of the police began to see them as allies. Marcus saw the hope in their eyes and knew that Mia's initiative was changing lives. As he watched Mia work, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The legacy he had built was being carried forward, and the ripple effect of his efforts was spreading further than he had ever imagined. A high-profile case tested the department's commitment to transparency. A celebrity was accused of assault, and the media frenzy was intense. Marcus and Mia were assigned to lead the investigation, their every move scrutinized. The pressure was immense, but Marcus remained steadfast. He knew that the department's integrity was on the line, and he was determined to handle the case with fairness and professionalism. Mia followed his lead, her respect for Marcus growing with each passing day. The investigation revealed that the accusations were false, and the department's handling of the case was praised. Marcus used the opportunity to highlight the importance of due process and the dangers of rushing to judgment. As the media storm subsided, Marcus reflected on the lessons learned. He knew that the department's commitment to justice had been tested, and they had passed with flying colors. A new threat emerged in the form of a serial arsonist targeting community centers. The department was baffled, and the community was on edge. Marcus and Mia worked tirelessly to track down the culprit, their determination unwavering. The investigation led them to a disgruntled former employee of one of the centers. Marcus and Mia confronted him, their calm demeanor diffusing a potentially volatile situation. The man was arrested, and the community breathed a sigh of relief. As they left the scene, Mia turned to Marcus. "How do you stay so calm in situations like that?" Marcus smiled. "It's about seeing the person behind the problem. Everyone has a story, and sometimes understanding that story is the key to solving the problem." Mia nodded, her respect for Marcus deepening. She knew that she still had much to learn, but she was grateful for his guidance. The department faced another challenge when a natural disaster struck the city. Floodwaters ravaged neighborhoods, and the department was stretched thin. Marcus and Mia worked alongside community members, their shared humanity transcending the usual divides. The crisis brought out the best in people, and Marcus saw countless acts of heroism and kindness. He realized that the job wasn't just about fighting crime. It was about being there for people when they needed it most. As the waters receded and the city began to rebuild, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the bonds formed during the crisis would last a lifetime. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus took a moment to reflect on his journey, the highs and lows of his career flashing before his eyes. He thought about the lives he'd touched, the battles he'd fought, and the lessons he'd learned. He realized that the job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than he found it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A new challenge emerged as a wave of cybercrime swept the city. Marcus and Mia were thrust into a world they barely understood, their skills put to the test. But Marcus refused to back down. He sought out experts, learned new skills, and pushed the department to adapt to the changing landscape. The fight was difficult, but Marcus knew that it was necessary. He realized that the job was constantly evolving, and that they had to evolve with it. As they made their first arrest in the cybercrime unit, Marcus felt a sense of pride. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A fellow officer was killed in the line of duty, a stark reminder of the risks they faced every day. Marcus was devastated, his grief mingling with a sense of guilt. But he also knew that the best way to honor his fallen comrade was to keep fighting, to keep pushing for change. The funeral was a somber affair, the department coming together to mourn their loss. Marcus spoke, his words a tribute to the sacrifices made by those who wore the badge. As he left the cemetery, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. A young boy approached Marcus during a community event, his eyes wide with admiration. "I want to be a cop like you when I grow up," he said. Marcus knelt down, his voice gentle. "Being a cop isn't just about wearing the badge, it's about helping people, about making a difference. You think you can do that?" The boy nodded, his determination clear. As Marcus watched the boy run off, he felt a sense of hope. He knew that the next generation held the key to real change, and that they were ready to rise to the challenge. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. Marcus stood at the edge of the city, the skyline stretching out before him. He thought about the journey he'd been on, the battles he'd fought, and the lessons he'd learned. He realized that the job wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than he found it. As he looked out over the city, Marcus felt a sense of gratitude. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The department had come so far, and the community was stronger because of the bonds they had built together. Marcus's legacy was secure, not just in the policies he had implemented, but in the hearts of the people he had touched. But the story doesn't end here. The fight for justice, empathy, and humanity continues, and it's a story worth following. If you've been moved by Marcus's journey, if you've felt the weight of his struggles and the triumph of his victories, then don't stop here. Subscribe to stay connected with stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of humanity.